Now, the interesting thing is you can apply lots of different metrics to success. But for example, if you ask people, how's your bottom line been? Most marketers can't even answer that question when they're part of a big conglomerate, because the bottom line is a highly arbitrary number. But when you ask people, how have you done there compared to your direct competition? Everybody knows. And so what we do in our study, we compare the answers to all the other questions that we ask. Of the top 2 out of 7, in other words, they grew faster or a lot faster than their competition, versus the answers of the people that gave a 1 or a 2 out of 7. In other words, they declined a lot or a little versus their competition. Or if I'm being a little ungenerous, the winners against the losers. And by contrasting the answers of winners and losers, you actually start to see some really interesting differences. And that then begs the question of, and between those differences, did marketing have anything to do with it? So to really answer your question, what we found was that overperforming growth organizations were defining growth differently. They were actually talking about growth not in terms of the bottom line, but in terms of overall multi-stakeholder growth. They were taking the trouble to understand the needs of their different stakeholders, be it their colleagues, be it their customers or community, or even the capital markets. But for each of those 4 stakeholders, they were taking the trouble to find out what's the unmet need, what's the driving force here, and what constitutes value in the minds of these stakeholders, and then making it important to deliver against multiple or even all of those stakeholders. So that's what over delivery growth organizations do differently.
So I'm going to do a little advert for the program that Richie is on and I was on. You get to talk to some amazing people who have lived the spirit of this and seen the benefits. And I remember very vividly, Alan Jope, CEO of Unilever, gave a fantastic presentation. And at its heart, there is something a bit more purposeful about what you're advocating. And I'd love to get your perspective actually on Unilever, who have stuck to their guns despite criticism. And it's sort of now probably the talking point on this subject because of the role of active investors who perhaps don't believe in this at all. What's your perspective on Unilever and Alan?
Well, Alan's leaving, so the first sort of platonic reaction might be, well, there you are, it didn't work, he had to leave. I believe, thankfully, that there's a lot more behind the story. I worked for Unilever for 14 years. I know its culture. I know its purpose. And I still know quite a lot of the leaders there too. And I know that what drives them is truly purposeful. They're not out to make a quick buck. And I don't think that can ever be used as an excuse for not operating effectively and efficiently. And I remember very well working at the very first onset of the Dove Real Beauty campaign, which was probably arguably one of the best. It has won the award, I think, for the best campaign of the last 30 years. But what happened in the years immediately after was really interesting, because there were a lot of brand marketers that joined Dove and forgot about the basics of marketing. Suddenly they were so inspired by the purpose that they forgot that the products needed to be innovative and that they needed to deliver on moisture and all the things that the personal care products of Dove need to deliver against. And so I think this is actually now true for Unilever. There's never an excuse to run an inefficient corporation or to not be operationally excellent, even if you're very purposeful. And so I don't know enough about the operations of Unilever, but I do know that they've been under-delivering against some of their direct peers on an operational level. But I truly believe, and I think it will show, and I think the new CEO that comes in with the backing of these activist investors will quickly discover that actually there's some really big gems and that there's a purpose there that will drive differentiation, will drive pricing power, because it stands for something bigger that really connects with what's happening in the world today, what's valued by many consumers, but it doesn't take away from the need to run an efficient and effective organization.
Marc, thank you for that, and what a great perspective, and I love the notion that actually operation efficiency doesn't actually run in the face of purpose and multi-stakeholder growth. It needs to be combined together in to create the whole. I'd like to turn the page now, Marc, a little bit. I mean, you've had an absolutely stellar career on so many levels, whether it be a corporate career, stroke an entrepreneur, stroke, getting back into corporate land again. Of course, what you're doing with IRG, remarkable. I'd just like perhaps reflect on that a little bit and maybe talk to us about how that whole thing came about and how were you able to roll with the punches to be able to kind of navigate through this.
Cool. Well, in all honesty, Richie, I don't know that I agree with your characterization of the career, because at many points in my career, it has felt like a struggle, like hard work, and I certainly don't reflect back and think, wow, that was highly successful. I'm very proud of some of the things that happened along the way, but the feeling during the path was often one of struggle and even fight, and yeah, that's so it feels slightly disconnected from how you framed the question.
Well, tell Marc, I'm intrigued. I mean, tell us when you talk and fight. Those are strong characterizations and strong words. Why did you feel like that? Like, what was underlying?
Well, so if I start with the very first thought that came up when you were talking. So at Unilever, when I started, there was a class of 25 people that started at the same time, and they were really, many of those are actually still friends. But at the same time, there's a sense of competitiveness, not at the expense of each other, but just sort of wanting to do well. And there were really other people that were different in their approach to work, in their communication style, that were deemed to be highly successful within Unilever. So for many years, I saw those people move up the career ladder faster than I, much faster, and their promotions seemed to go smoothly. Whereas, as I just described earlier, I always felt I needed to fight for them, and fight for the opportunities that ultimately I was given. And I think it has something to do with probably some of the qualities on my part that later served me well as an entrepreneur. But within a large organization, they don't always necessarily lead to immediate recognition or success.
Yeah, it's must feel uncomfortable, and of course, we all have that imposter syndrome that makes us compare. I'm reminded of the Baz Luhrmann song "Sunscreen," and I've told my kids this many times. Don't be jealous. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. The race is long, and in the end, it's only with yourself.
Yeah.
So, so how did you cope through that? Because that must send you into turmoil from time to time.
I don't know. I think my natural reaction was just to fight harder, to work harder, and I think probably in those early years, and I really do mean all the way through to the sort of first 7, 8 years, I was probably just trying too hard. I mean, if I had to distill a lesson from that, I would say don't try too hard and be true to yourself, because I think I too often in life and certainly within my career, I've tried too hard to fit in, try to be liked, try to do what the most senior leaders respected or what I saw people that were going up the career ladder more smoothly were doing. And it took a long time for me to discover that's just not who I am. And let me work the way I am, and perhaps build teams around me that accommodate for the things I'm not, or smooth out the things I'm too much. And ultimately, I started building a machine of which I was part, which was effective. But it took me a long time to realize that I shouldn't try and be somebody that I wasn't.
Marc, it's I totally can almost relate to what you're saying there. But there's been one clear constant in being frank. I'm intrigued by that relationship because it absolutely feels It's sort of like you describe it, right? It's co-founding all the way through. And perhaps you can talk to that a little bit, and maybe the value to share that burden as you've gone through your career and what.
Yeah, yeah, it is. We're explicit about it. Our wives joke that we are each other's other wife. We celebrated 21 years together last year with our wives. We thought that was appropriate. Um, but it's true, and it's interesting because when we met, there was a spark that went across, and it was one around the same type of energy around developments in marketing and opportunities in global brands. And so, at a content level, there was a spark, and we quickly found a way to collaborate, which is incredibly important because if you are completely the same, that would be an issue. But I remember we went off and we actually wrote our business plan together by flying off to a trailer. Do you know what an Airstream is? One of these aluminium trailers. It's from the 70s in America. And my wife and I had bought one for a sabbatical, and we were just coming out of a sabbatical. And Frank and I started sparring around the ideas of creating a company together. And in the end, we said, you know what, we just need to be together for a week or so and do this. And so we flew down together to this Airstream and then drove cross country across America to write our business plan together. But on the plane down, we did a Myers-Briggs. We did one of these personality tests, thinking or perhaps hoping that we, somehow would subtly supplement and complement each other, only to discover that our peaks and troughs were almost identical. So we threw that out. But that wasn't the whole picture. Frank is very much the deep listener, the person that connects with humans more as humans, and makes time, whatever is happening, for people that he senses need that time. Whereas I am much more the entrepreneur, the can do, but also blinders on, because if I listen too carefully or if I wait too long, stuff doesn't happen. So I'm a little bit more can do. And the two of us together, we push each other, and we also hold each other back when that's necessary. I think he cleans up a lot after me. It's happened many times. Um, and he also very clearly says, look, Mark, you may think that you've explained this, but no one understands. And you haven't used the right words, or you've used your language rather than their language. So we are explicit in how we help each other. And I'm perfectly clear that I wouldn't have achieved half the things that I've achieved if Frank hadn't been by my side.
Well, what a great partnership, and long may it continue, many years ahead. And of course, your underlying mission is, as you said, which is that for all the tools and data and awareness and understanding of marketing, its influence has been in decline in the boardroom. And what's your diagnosis as to why this problem exists in the world for you and Frank to solve?
Well, so there's two parts to that answer. I think it's the influence has receded where the marketer didn't stand up to claim it. So actually, I think it's a much more inspiring story. I don't think this is a story of things happening to us without any ability to react or change things. What we actually found was that, yes, it's true. Marketing has gone through a wonderful time of change. And maybe in the eyes of people that are outside marketing, we've been distracted from the core of building business growth by adding value for our consumers. I think strategic marketers have always seen the two go hand in hand. And strategic marketers are probably shocked by the concept of the creation of a role like chief growth officer, because what the hell? If that's not what you are, what are you? But that's what happens. And I think a lot of marketers became very functionally adapt because they had to learn so many new skills about the digital metrics, new agencies, new budgets, new accountability, new measures. Um, and perhaps while those marketers were learning all those things, and I think a whole generation of marketers started out thinking that those were the most important things, they forgot, I would call that the sort of how to win part of marketing. They forgot the where to play part, which is really before you do anything, let's figure out where we're trying to go strategically. Where's the white space? What's the unmet need? And what we now see is that marketers that understand that companies need to cater to these multiple stakeholders. If I can take a step back, CEOs that are winning see that their companies will only survive and grow sustainably long term if they cater to the and create value for all their major stakeholders, not just shareholders, but stakeholders. Now, the interesting thing is, and lots of CEOs have signed declarations saying that they're going to make that important. But the interesting thing is that if you say A, you have to say B, because the moment you recognize all stakeholders as being important, you need to understand what actually moves them, what their unmet needs are, what constitutes value in their minds. And that's true for a colleague just as much as it's true for somebody that lives in the community or leads an NGO that's relevant for you. All of these are stakeholders, and all of these people have unmet needs, have expectations of you. And so a marketer has endemically, generically, the skills to help their colleagues in the board, like the CHRO or even the CHO or the CSR department, to help them figure out for their stakeholder, what are these unmet needs? How can I create value for these people? And so I'm not arguing that CMO should take over HR. Of course they shouldn't. But in every course we do, I ask the marketers in the room, how many of you believe that the corporate brand, that the employee brand is managed as professionally as your consumer brands? And typically I get one hand out of 20, if that. Well, what an opportunity. And the immediate impact of a marketer offering their services to a CHRO and saying, let me help you with this. Let's figure out what the touchpoint strategy should be, what the employee brand really should stand for, what the value proposition and exchange is in an employee-employer relationship. So these CMOs, I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded. These are not losing influence. The ones that get this are actually gaining influence because they're collaborating more closely with their colleagues in the board, and they're adding value now across multiple disciplines. I find that very inspiring, and it is indeed the mission of the Institute for Real Growth to help marketers see that, understand it, and then apply it within their organization.
Absolutely. And Marc, related to that and the mission that you have at IRG is your findings around Da Vinci CMO. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that means and what are some of the strands to the Da Vinci CMO.
Well, it's a piece of work that we can't take credit for alone. We did it with Spencer Stewart, the executive search firm. And of course, they're actually, well, not of course, but they are the #1 search firm for CMOs. So CMOs are hired by CEOs. So they're having this conversation all the time. What are you looking for? What worked and what didn't work with your previous CMO? And the painful fact is that CMOs have a tenure, as we all know, that's quite significantly lower than the average tenure of a colleague in the boardroom. So when we dove into this and really spoke with those recruiters all around the world and said, what are the characteristics? We boiled it down to 2 different types of qualities, characteristics, if you like. One is experiences. And the experiences are basically, I would say, the 10 buckets of marketing today, modern marketing. And look, no one is good at all of them. Someone in marketing somewhere needs to be good at them, of course. But what the CMO needs to be clear with, and this is alignment of expectations with their direct colleagues and certainly with their boss, is which 2, 3, 4 of these are going to be crucial for our company to win in the next 3 years. And they need to represent excellence in those areas, because otherwise they're not the right person for the right job. But that's highly dependent on, the maturity of a company, the competitive situation, and so forth. Those are the experiences. But the other part, which we believe is really important for all growth leaders, are what we call the Da Vinci growth attitudes. And those are much more timeless. They're probably highly adaptable to other areas of the business as well, but they are basic attitudes, like, for example, curiosity and the willingness to keep learning. Nothing rocket science about that. But the painful part is that so often when people walk into the boardroom, they stop learning, they stop asking questions, and they start talking. Or being an inspiring storyteller. Now, that I do think is more important for a marketer than many of the other disciplines. But we're often the ones within an organization that actually talk to everyone else on behalf of the CEO, hopefully, about the corporate purpose. Why are we all choosing to walk into this factory 5 days a week and spend most of our living day here, blood, sweat, and tears? What is it that makes this special? What are we trying to achieve? And it's often the marketer with their hopefully inspiring storyteller that actually gets people on the change journey, because all companies surely are always changing to be better at what they need to do. Well, people don't like change. You need to inspire people quite frequently to take leaps of faith. And that's what inspirational storyteller requires. And there are a few other attitudes like being a servant leader. We think the time of a celebrity CMO are way behind us. The Sergio Zyman, or what was that chap at Heineken? They were big CMOs. I'm not in any way contesting that they did important things, but it was all about them in the end. And I don't think there's any organization in today's world that can survive like that. And I don't think there's a CMO that can survive like that. A servant leader, in contrast, is somebody that recognizes that it's going to take teamwork, that it's going to take a lot of people feeling incredibly proud about what they have done. And if we get to orchestrate that, then perhaps we tell our wife or our boss will know that we managed to make this all come together. But it shouldn't be us on the poster, and it shouldn't be us at the front of the room claiming credit.
Love it. And there's a thread of humility that runs through that, which also runs through yourself, Marc, and I know Frank as well, which is very refreshing. Just on the subject of storytelling, you will have come across, you've got a great panoramic view of some of the best CMOs in town. Can you give us an example of who's an amazing storyteller and what has that led to?
Oh, well, there are so many, but somebody that I have enormous respect for, and I just had the opportunity to listening him talk about his journey recently, was Antonio Lucio. So this man was a winning marketer. Basically, he came from nothing. Really fought very hard to make his way into marketing at Pepsi. Ultimately, became head of international marketing at Pepsi, as it was known at the time, and when I first met him. But then became the CMO at Visa and helped them go public. So he played the role there. Really, talk about storytelling. He was telling stories to investors, potential investors, because they IPO'd. Then he became the CMO of a new company, HP, which of course came out of the big HP, but now they were split two ways. And talk about humbleness. I mean, the H&P leaders, I was touring their offices by Antonio Lucio because I think he had a real personal connection with them. And he showed how they, from very humble beginnings, built a technology powerhouse that's changed America and everything we do. And then became the CMO at Meta, which arguably was very important, but also painful. He left there only a few years later, but with high principles, and then walked away and said, you know what? You mentioned diversity below, Marc, as one of the things so important to get our marketing industry to be successful. He decided he was going to create his own program with the Aspen Institute and Yale University, no two small partners, focused completely on driving more diversity into the senior ranks of marketing. This is a man that when he tells a story, I'm hanging by every word he says, and he oozes humbleness. But when you look at the list of accomplishments, you can't but be impressed.
What a wonderful example. Thank you. And talking about the role of diversity and helping the next sort of gen into those CMO roles, experience or a lived experience or experience when you talk to different CMOs. So I wonder, what advice you have to aspiring CMOs, perhaps people even at the junior to middle part of their careers, looking to become a CMO in the future. What would you say are some of the pieces of advice that you would give them through their careers?
It's a very simple one. They need you. Most companies don't know it, but the definition of marketing is insight-based value creation. Insight-based means you need to represent the population that you serve. And so if the organization somehow has walls up around it and is too white or too black for that matter, or too much oriented around an English culture where the company is expanding into other areas of the world, whatever it is, if it's too much one way and not truly representative of the world that it's trying to actually create value for, then the company has a problem and they need you. So that's one, but I'm going to add something to the list because marketing has had a bad rap. There's actually a declining registration at universities worldwide for the marketing discipline. I now teach at Oxford, and it's true there also. And when you delve a little further, basically what people think about marketing on the surface is that it sells. It sells things that the world doesn't need to people that don't want them, and that it's really perhaps one of the big sources of the ecological problems that the world faces today. Now, if that was true, and undoubtedly in some instances it is, that's not a discipline that I would like to enter either. And so if I was a marketer, I would think about other places to go. But I beg to contrast that with another role. Because if marketing is truly able to help corporations understand what it takes to create value for all stakeholders, and if we buy into the premise that companies will only grow sustainably long term if they create value for all stakeholders, then there's a role that marketers need to step up to. I would call it marketing's ikigai, to help the organization understand the opportunity, but then very specifically understand the needs and the opportunity to create value for all of those stakeholders. And that's not just internally. Through our brands, marketers are actually able to change how the world, read billions of people, think about just about everything, feel about being part of a community or so forth, and what they actually do. I mean, if you, facing what is important today, if you are the brand that convinces an African father that there is no issue, no stigma around your daughter having her period, and therefore you don't keep her at home and keep her out of school, which is a massive problem in some cultures. But actually, there's a product called Always. And with that, your daughter can go to school. And with that, that girl has a proper education. Then Always is making more money, but more girls are going to school. And I would say, well done, Always. And that is one of many examples where brands change the way that people think about important things. Equally, if you're Patagonia and you're able to create communities that actually stand up together and push back on whether it's local government or industry or it doesn't matter who, but literally making a difference because as a community they're sort of attached to a concept of what's important to them, then as a brand you're making a massive difference. Or if you literally get people to wash your laundry at 30 instead of 60 degrees, or close the faucet while you're brushing your teeth. These are all things that might sound trivial, but I actually don't think they are. I think if we think about who's going to make the big difference long term, I think it's probably going to be organizations and what they say to consumers through advertising and packaging matters. So now, if you're a young person and thinking, how can I make a difference in the world? Sure, you can join an NGO, or you can go to a national park and serve there and keep one national park great. Or you can actually get people to respect nature and understand how essential it is. So I would argue, if you're young and you're thinking about marketing, great opportunity to actually help the world get to where it needs to get.
Well, Marc, very inspiring, profound, and you are in the business of changing the world, directly and indirectly. So we are coming up to time. So last question: as you look ahead, what does success look like for you? What are you ambitious for? Where does this adventure take you?
Well, it's a question I've actually been thinking a lot about recently, Mark. We touched upon the fact briefly that today we're launching a new study. It's actually only the 5th study in 20 years. And so there seems to be a bit of a cadence now in my life where I learn, which I enjoy tremendously, by listening to people, getting inspired by people, good and bad. And then see a challenge in sort of codifying that and seeing if we can create a framework or something that people can emulate wherever they sit. And then I love going out and, actually sharing that and getting people to connect with it and apply it. That's a replicable model, for me, at least. And so as long as that is what I feel I'm doing, and now with this new study, it feels like a reset. And we're still talking about the findings of a previous study, but already beginning to learn about the opportunities and challenges around a follow-up phase. I think I can probably keep this going for a while. I don't see a hard stop because it's energizing me and it allows me to meet a lot of people. And ultimately, I am a people's person, and that gives me energy and fun.
Well, that's a great way to end. I would hope that you do keep going for all the good that you're doing in the world. And so good luck with this new study. So I'm just going to do a couple of the key learnings and insights for everybody listening back, just to try and draw it to a close. We talked about marketing losing influence over time. But actually, as you point out, Marc, you need to stand up to claim it as a marketer to have that influence. And as part of an overall growth strategy for real growth. And the work you've done has benefited over 1,000 CMOs and CEOs in that regard. So you're into a great spot in terms of making a difference in the world. And this is all about multi-stakeholder growth. We talked a bit about Unilever and remembering, let's not forget the basics. There's no excuses there. We also talked about, in your own regard, at times you've had to struggle and fight, and maybe at times you tried too hard and we're not always able to be who you are. But I think through time, you've found yourself to a much deeper level in the impact you're having. It was lovely to reflect on your relationship with Frank, the thoughtful listener, the yin to your yang, sometimes cleans up your mess. And when you talked about that, and it's a thread throughout, you with a lot of grace and humility, and very humble in the way you speak. But yeah, you and Frank, clearly a very powerful combination. We talked about the Da Vinci CMO, and it's as much about attitude as anything, being curious, being a great storyteller, being a servant leader, helping others to take leaps of faith. And we just touched on Antonio Lucio and everything that he's achieved across many organizations. And the key piece of advice, organizations need marketing. They may not know it. They may have forgotten it. They maybe need to rediscover it. But that's where it takes real passion. And that's the thing that really shines through for you, Marc. Alongside the humility, there's also that burning passion. And so when at the end you say, keep going, I have no doubt that you will keep going with that burning desire to enhance the reputation, standing, and impact of marketing towards a better world. It's been lovely to share the time with you today, Marc. Thank you very much indeed.